Alright, let's talk about Hellboy. Specifically the Guillermo Del Toro films, and why they piss me the fuck off. Alright, I know that sounds aggressive, but I promise this isn't going to be a one-way hate fest.
Oh, this is gonna hurt.
One thing I really want to convey is that I do think these movies are exceptionally entertaining. Guillermo Del Toro is very skilled when it comes to production design, and combined with some great chemistry from the core cast, the movies are pretty consistently engaging. The main point I'm trying to make is that these movies don't work as Hellboy films. There is a painfully frustrating amount of untapped potential from the comics that I think could have turned a good film into a great film. The Hellboy comics are phenomenal in so many ways, and so many of the choices Guillermo Del Toro makes throw a lot of the best parts out of the window. The first things I want to talk about are the strengths of the Hellboy comics. Hellboy has been showing up in stories since 1993. He was created by writer and artist Mike Mignola, and as the years went on, his comics and subsequent spin-offs would begin to develop the unique sense of personality that would define the series. Hellboy is an incredibly effective blending of genres, mixing elements of black comedy, horror, and adventure into a wonderfully strange, surprisingly grounded, and a wickedly funny collection of stories. And that doesn't even include Mike Mignola's magnificent art. One of the main reasons why I wanted to make this essay in video format was because of how important the art of the series is. The impressive visuals every page boasts is so integral that not being able to show it off is nearly impossible when talking about the comic. The art of the series put Hellboy on the map. It's what made the comic stand out, especially in the early years, where studios like Marvel and DC had become known for their garish and loud presentation. I seriously cannot underestimate just how much I love this art, and how it brings to life the world of Hellboy. Which brings me to my next point. Hellboy is all about the setting. You see, when Mike Mignola creates a Hellboy story, he almost always bases it off some sort of myth or folktale. These myths usually come from communities all over the world. They tend to have rural origins. Because of this base influence, Hellboy's natural elements are places isolated from our day-to-day lives. Hellboy is a paranormal agent who fights demons, ghosts, and other various fiends across the world. Where Hellboy goes is what brings the story to life, whether it's fighting witches in the American backwoods, playing the games of the Fae to rescue a kidnapped baby in the woods of Ireland, or hunting a gambling vampire in Prague. Each story has its own unique atmosphere that lends the comics its endless potential for creative storytelling. So that's the basic outline for your average Hellboy story. And on its own, it's pretty simple. It's when we get to the characterization of Hellboy and the major players of the comics that we get more into narrative complexity. Hellboy is a man who spends his entire life followed by the shadow of what the world believes to be his destiny, and at every turn, he refuses. In simple terms, Hellboy exists as a giant middle finger to the concept of fate. Fate in most cases being represented by the antagonists Hellboy would face over the course of the series. This defiance to the pretentious grandstanding nature of the central antagonists is what grounds the comics. It's what makes us view a 7-foot red man with horn stumps on his head and a massive rune-covered right hand as just a normal dude trying to do his job. Many people have a strong belief that they have control over their actions and future, and it's this base desire that makes Hellboy relatable. So a lot of these traits and the relatability I'm talking about with Hellboy also translate to Hellboy's supporting cast, the two most prominent characters being Abe Sapien and Liz Sherman. Both characters share the same grounded and relatable nature, but their nature is used to explore far different themes. Abe Sapien and Liz Sherman are completely normal and reasonable people who could never live a normal life. Abe due to his appearance, and Liz due to her destructive potential. Unlike Hellboy though, they have no grand fate. They have nowhere to go except stay within the confines of the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense. There's a certain element of tragedy to these characters. This tragedy, alongside their bond with Hellboy, creates this sense of family that is incredibly compelling. So now that we know some of the big effective elements of the comics, let's take a look at the first film adaptation. What elements did Guillermo Del Toro take from his source material as he developed his story? Unfortunately, the answer is very few. Remember when I said that Hellboy is at its strongest in settings that are alien to most people's day-to-day life? Well, for reasons I still don't fully understand, the large majority of the 2004 Hellboy film takes place in a generic city that I still can't find the name of online. I'm baffled by this choice. Like I said before, Guillermo del Toro has an excellent eye for production design. And this motherfucker just decided to rob us of so much visual potential by having Hellboy fight monsters in train stations and city streets. Thankfully, in the later parts of the movie, we get some fun set pieces at a graveyard, but for so damn long, the film just makes the most boring choices possible.
The next giant problem I have with the Hellboy films is the character John Myers.
Silence.
John Myers is an FBI agent who gets transferred into the BPRD. He's a token audience surrogate. His whole character is based on the idea that he's supposed to be the person the audience relates to. We see the world through his eyes, but wait a minute. Wasn't there already a character we talked about who's supposed to be relatable? Didn't we have a main protagonist whose core trait was that they were the grounding force of the series? The fact that this movie didn't understand that Hellboy is the character the audience sees the world through is such a blatant misunderstanding of the comics. Since John Myers is now the relatable character, Hellboy is shoved into a different role. Instead of being a funny, mellow-mannered, and practical character, Hellboy acts like a giant man-child. He complains like a teenage boy and rebels against his father constantly. Now that I have covered the character of Hellboy, let's talk about the last two major problems with these films. Instead of being somewhat tragic, Abe Sapien and Liz Sherman are bland, cookie-cutter versions of popular film tropes. In the comics, Abe Sapien is a reserved, self-conscious version of Hellboy. Unlike his bold and head-on counterpart, Abe tends to be the more reserved man. While he lacks self-confidence, he is wickedly smart and extremely competent. In the film, he is almost nothing like his comic counterpart. Instead of being a fleshed-out individual, he's a quirky, psychic copy-paste of C-3PO. Abe spends the film being strange and giving exposition, adding no emotional or plot value to the first film. Liz becomes the mandatory love interest of the story. While I do believe that she has many positive traits in the original movie, she loses all dimension in the sequel. Liz exists only to be worried about Hellboy. This goes so far that she fulfills the ultimate movie stereotype and makes an possibly apocalyptic decision out of her love for Hellboy.
So why did these movies come out like this? Why are the Hellboy films so thematically alien from their source material? Well, a couple of years ago I figured something out that made a whole lot of things make more sense. One choice that was made for the films was to make Hellboy a secret to the outside world. In the comics, he is well known to the public, and in most cases no one really cares. But the movies put a huge emphasis on the idea of the paranormal being something hidden from the public. And here's where I get a little conspiratorial, but I am convinced this is why these movies got made. The 2004 Hellboy was a direct knockoff of Men in Black. Okay, I know that sounds crazy, but let me give you some examples of the overarching beats of these films. A young, up-and-coming law enforcement officer is hired to join an organization that secretly fights the paranormal on a daily basis. And that's just the overall plot. There are multiple scenes in the Hellboy films that are eerily similar to the scenes from Men in Black, and every change made that I have covered in this essay brings Hellboy closer to Men in Black. Instead of taking place in strange or isolated places, the film takes place in a city in New York. Instead of making Hellboy the emotional center, there's a young agent who had no idea this world even existed, and instead of a core cast of grounded characters, we get a menagerie of quirky, different demons and even heroes. I don't know if these were changes brought on by studio higher-ups or Guillermo Del Toro, but either way, there was some unwillingness to let the movies be unique. Hellboy is amazing, and it's incredibly disappointing to see it change to a mediocre ripoff of a movie that already existed.
That's it. I'm done.